Welcome back, folks. We are working on our BMI calculator project. We are dealing with the model class, which is part of the model view controller. And just as a recap, remember, model has to do with the data. So if we are doing form validation, that's really the job of the model. If we are going to do any logic that deals with our data, you see those if else, that's logic. Then, and you see that if data is greater than, lesser than, lower, that's all part of the logic. So that's all the, shall we say, the domain of what the model should do. Now, in my video, I did the lower feet range, upper feet range, and we're going to use the BMI calculator chart that you might have seen in previous videos for this, but I'm just going to give you the values. These are all private static. They are all ints because they're all integers. We're going to do, just like we did lower feet range, we're going to do lower inches range. And we're going to set that to 0. And then we're going to go ahead and do the lower or upper inches range. In upper inches range, we're going to enforce 11 inches, no more. If you want to say 12 inches, well, then add to your feet. Unless you don't like that. Maybe you decide that, you know what, I'll let them put as many inches as they want. You better be careful how you enforce that because you could have weird, wonky things like 6 feet and 13 inches or something. I don't know. Anyway, we'll do the same thing for pounds. And, of course, our lower, I believe, was 48 according to the chart. No, it was 91. Excuse me. I was thinking inches tall, total inches tall. So 91, and then we do the upper range. Upper pounds range, 443. Okay. So in a little bit, we're going to validate feet, validate inches, validate pounds. So I wanted to get all these variables in place for us to do that. We have our helper form validations where we're checking whether it's empty or in range. There's a couple other things that we can do. What we're going to do is I'm going to add one little piece here. And at this point, we're getting a field whether, oh, actually, you know what? We're going to save it for a different method. Let's talk about feet. Let's do one that's going to do form validation for feet. And I'm going to leave these helper ones down below. I want to just keep these variables here and keep them handy for reference. I'm going to validate feet. Okay. In order to validate feet, we're going to create our what I like to call my Yoda type method. Now, this one is going to be Boolean. Either feet is valid or it's not valid. Okay. So we're going to call is valid feet, as Yoda might say, as might say Yoda. And this one is going to get an edit text field. We're going to start with that. And then, of course, it needs to return a true or a false in every possible situation. So we're going to check to see if it's empty. And that's pretty easy now. We just put in if is empty. And then we need to pass it a field. So we'll just pass it the field we have here. And then if it's empty, we're going to return false because it's not valid. Now, if we were going to validate inches, we would not return a false. We could maybe actually set it to 0. All right, but we're going to return false. And here's where we're going to do something a little, this is what I was talking about earlier. What we're going to do is we are going to indicate an error message if it's empty. So watch what I do. Field is an edit text. It has a lot of different methods, things that it can do. Okay, a field can get the text, or we can set an error. So we're going to set an error. Feed is empty. Okay, so we're going to set an error. Now that we have our field, we could totally do that. Next, we're going to try to parse the field. Okay. So if we can convert it to an int, good. We're going to want to get that information, and then we're going to check its range. We're going to do this all in a try block. Try is where we think there could be an error that crashes the program. And so we're going to try to parse that field. And if we can't, we need to deal with the error that happens. So that's a catch. So the try catch block looks something like this. Like so. So we're going to try to do something. If it triggers an error, we're going to deal with that inner code and not let it just crash the program. So if we happen to have an exception, then we have a problem with their form. It's in the wrong format. So we're going to do two things. We're going to go ahead and set an error message. You will probably find we can't even get this error to trigger. We'll see if we can. And in this case, if we're trying to parse it, here, I'll deal with this in just a moment. Let's go ahead and do with where it might trigger an exception. So what we're going to do is we have our field. So we're going to do the integer class. I'm going to put a dot. And there's this thing called Parse It. And what that does is it takes a string and sees if it can convert it into an integer. Now, to get that string, oh, wait a minute. Before we do this, I realize I need to create a variable. All right, let me back up a little bit. I'm going to write int data equals. So we want to create an integer variable. We'll call it data, and we'll try to parse it. And if you want, you can call it data. You can call it feet because we're in the isValid feet. But I'm going to keep it data in case we decide we can use this in other circumstances other than just feet. I'm going to do a parse integer, and that's going to be field.getText.toString, like so. Now, if, for example, this were empty, we couldn't convert an empty value into an integer, and that would cause an error. Okay, but if we did some kind of string character in here, then that would also trigger an error because we can't convert characters into integers. And this is why we have this catch in case something were to happen. So on the error here, just put enter feet as numbers, not characters. And then we're going to return false. Okay, so we're partway into this, but we're not quite there yet. One of the things you'll notice is this little red underline here at the bottom of the isValid feet. And if you hover, it says it's missing a return statement. And the reason why is because we have different code paths. We have an if block here. There's a return statement. We have a try with no return statement. It wants there to be a return statement. And then we have a catch with a return statement. If we add a return statement in here, that will be satisfied. And you'll see at a certain point when I do the return statement, that line will go away. But we're not done validating, because all we've done is we've converted the information in our feet field into an integer. We still need to check to make sure it's in range. So I'm going to put data is in range. I'm going to pass it data. And then remember, this is feet. So we're going to do the lower feet range and then the upper feet range, like so. If we are in range, we are good. We're going to return true. Now, we still have the red underline because whenever we do an if, there needs to be somewhere outside that has a return statement. There's a code path that has not been explored, and that's what if there isn't, if it doesn't match here. And in this case, we have an else. And in our else block, we're going to return false because we're saying it's not in range. Okay. However, we need another error message. So I'm going to add that right here. Field.setError. Now on here, we need to give some kind of information that is usable. Okay. So we're going to put a little string here, and then we're going to put lower feet range. Do a little ampersand with the space. Oh, I need the plus sign here. I'm going to pass it about. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on this line. We'll put a plus, upper feet range, plus, period. So it's going to have a message. Feet must be between the lower range and the upper range, and that will set our error. We return false. Note, there's no red underline, and that is, if you think about it, somewhere in this curly bracket, there needs to be a return statement. And inside the if, there's one. Inside the try, there's one in the if and one in the else. Catch. What's nice about this is this makes sure we can't possibly have a situation where we don't return a Boolean value. So it's nice that Java does that for us. So what we're going to do is we got to test this out. So is feet valid? And then hopefully we'll get all these error messages. Right. Before I run this, I did make a change, I think, to this. And that is, if you look here in our edit text fields, part of the form validation is using this max length. And so, for example, in our feet, we set the maximum length to 1. If you wanted to allow for 10 feet, you would have to actually change that 1 to a 2. And then there isn't one under inches, but if you think about it, there should be no more than 2 digits. So I'm going to go ahead and add it in here. So Android max length. There it is. Little m, capital L. I'm going to put 2 on here. And then we're going to scroll down to our pounds, edit text, which is here. And we're going to add our max length to 3. Because, and by the way, the length is not talking about what number it is, but how many possible characters, how many positions. So 3 would mean we could go all the way up to 999 and still have it fit. Part, of course, the form validation is in the fact that it has the input type of number, which forces us to not be able to put in characters. If I had removed that, then we could trigger the other error. But let's just go ahead and design this, or let's go ahead and test this out as is and see what kind of errors we can trigger when we run it. Actually, I take it back. Before I run this, I need to call the new method. So let me do that real quick. Okay, at this point in my on-click listener, I'm going to do, I already did this model is empty. And let's try this out. I'm going to validate feet. So instead of model.isEmpty, let's do the following. If model.isValidFeet, and then we put edit feet, I don't need that extra line return, I just realized, so I'm going to just get rid of that. All right, so we're going to test the isValidFeet, and I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all that extra stuff. That's all I really need to see before I test it. Let's try to test this. Oh, I need my semicolons. I saw the red underline. I was like, uh-oh, I missed something. Those little semicolons. Wacky. Here we go. All right, let's try feet with nothing. Oh, whoa. Here we go. Sorry, it'd be just a moment. Okay, here we go. Try to calculate. Feet is not valid. Look, feet is empty. Okay, let's put in here 1. Calculate. Feet must be between 3 and 9. So there we have it. It worked on there. Actually, let's do 4. Calculate. Feet is valid down here. All right, so we've tested that out. Now, in the next video, I'm going to do the same thing for our other fields, and then we'll try to chain them all together and actually calculate the BMI. We'll see if we can do that in one more video. Stay tuned.